supporting Russia's Vladimir Putin, President Trump just reversed course, now insisting he backs U.S. intelligence agencies which blame Russia for attacking the U.S. presidential election. But the president continues to claim others could also be responsible. I'll speak with Senator Chris Coons of the Foreign Relations and Judiciary Committees. But our correspondents and specialists, they are standing by with full coverage. First, let's go straight to our senior White House correspondent, Jeff Zeleny. Jeff, tell us more about the president's rather stunning effort today at damage control.
Well, if it was a firestorm unlike any other of his time in office so far, both internally and externally. And we are told that several of his top aides gathered in the Situation Room to try and piece together these remarks that we saw the president give earlier this afternoon. He was hearing from Republican loyal allies on editorial pages across the country. He knew he had to do something. But Wolf, when he was sitting inside the White House this afternoon, certainly not on the world stage as he was in Helsinki, but he tried to explain the remarks and clear it up like this.
So I got a transcript, I reviewed it. I actually went out and reviewed a clip of an answer that I gave, and I realized that there is a need for some clarification. It should have been obvious. I thought it would be obvious, but I would like to clarify just in case it wasn't. In a key sentence in my remarks, I said the word would instead of wouldn't. The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why I wouldn't, or why it wouldn't be Russia. So, just to repeat it, I said the word would instead of wouldn't, and the sentence should have been, and I thought it would be maybe a little bit unclear on the transcript or unclear on the actual video. The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be Russia. Sort of a double negative. So you can put that in, and I think that probably clarifies things pretty good by itself.
Wolf, it's unclear if that clarifies anything at all, actually. It hardly clears up the spectacle of what happened at the summit. The president there talking as though it was, essentially a typographical error or a clerical error. The words, of course, meant far more than that. But they knew here at the White House, the president as well, he rarely apologizes for anything. And he did not use that word today, but he did acknowledge making a mistake when he has said that he does not believe that Russia has any reason to hack an American election. But Wolf, the more striking comments that the president made in Helsinki as we were there to watch him say, he said he sided with Vladimir Putin over the U.S. intelligence agencies. That created a firestorm here inside his administration. There was talk of, are some people possibly going to leave or resign? So he said this today to try and clean up that.
Let me be totally clear in saying that, and I've said this many times, I accept our intelligence community's conclusion that Russia's meddling in the 2016 election took place. Could be other people also. There's a lot of people out there. There was no collusion.
So in one breath, he's saying he accepts the U.S. intelligence community's findings, and then in the next breath, he says that it could be other people. Well, that is what President Trump has been saying again and again, for the better part of a year and a half or so, and insisting no collusion. That, of course, is what the special counsel is investigating. But when you talk to people close to the president, supporters of the president, we should point out, we're not even talking about Democrats here, they say that the president is so hung up on the idea that he did not win the election, or he didn't win it fairly or squarely, and so hung up on the possibility of collusion, that is what he is latching onto. Well, if all this discussion does not do one thing, it does not give an insight into what President Trump and President Putin talked about during their private meeting. This cleanup exercise here today is all about his public press conference. Officials tonight are asking if we'll ever find out what the president said to the Russian president privately.
Yeah, and you make a very important point, because the U.S. intelligence community concluded it was Russia that attacked the U.S. in the presidential election, and they don't say it could have been other people. As the president said, could be other people, a lot of people out there. So there's a clear distinction between what the president is still saying about other people as opposed to what the U.S. intelligence community concluded. Jeff Zeleny at the White House, thanks very much. There's more breaking news we're following. CNN is now learning that just a day after the Helsinki summit, Russian intelligence is planning to step up the targeting of Western nations. Let's go to our crime and justice reporter, Shimon Prokopez. Shimon, what are you learning?
Yeah, that's right, Wolf. There is increasing intelligence and certainly a concern among intelligence officials that the Russians are planning to step up some of their aggression, some of their activity towards the West. This, of course, including the U.S. and the U.K. Now, this comes at a time after the World Cup. Of course, it was Russia that was hosting the World Cup, and there was increased intelligence that indicated that the Russians would sort of stop any aggressive actions, would stop any kind of activity to sort of not take away from the World Cup, sort of the stage that they have been on, what the president even himself has said, a very successful World Cup, and that the Russians had created a lull in that they ordered that no activity, nothing aggressive from any of their intelligence agencies occur during the World Cup. Well, now that that is over, there is increased intelligence that has come in that indicates the Russians plan to step up some of their aggression, and possibly, what that may be is not entirely clear, but certainly there is concern along the intelligence agencies that something else could be coming from the Russians.
So what do officials, based on everything you're hearing, Shimon, expect the Russians to target?
Well, it could be increased cyber activity, as we've seen, intrusions into Western nations. It could also be something more aggressive and more serious, like what had happened in the UK, in London, where they attacked and tried to assassinate a former British spy. They're certainly concerned that that could be some activity that could occur. The UK investigators are still working that. They are close to identifying some of the people who were behind that attack. But certainly there is concern that that could happen in other parts of the world, Wolf.
Shimon Prokopez with the very latest, very disturbing information indeed. Also breaking, a Russian woman sits in a U.S. jail tonight. A federal grand jury has formally approved a criminal indictment of Maria Butina with 2 charges: conspiracy and acting as a foreign agent. She's accused of trying to set up secret contacts between Moscow and American politicians, including Donald Trump. Let's bring in our political correspondent, Sarah Murray, who is working the story for us. What do we know, Sarah, about Maria Butina's alleged operation?
Well, we basically know that she was trying to infiltrate American political organizations and other politically influential individuals in order to promote Russian interests. And that led to a number of different encounters. I mean, one of those encounters that we've talked about quite a bit is the fact that she and her mentor, Alexander Torshin, who is this Kremlin-linked banker, tried to establish a back channel of communications between then candidate Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin during the presidential campaign. Now, they weren't successful in trying to do this, but Torshin and Maria Butina, because they had these various connections through political organizations like the National Rifle Association, were able to swing by an exclusive dinner where they chatted briefly with Donald Trump Jr., although we're told that it didn't have anything to do with the Russian government. And let's look back even further, because the government says that this is a years-long effort. So go back to 2015. This is before any of us were talking about Putin, any of us were talking about Russia. Maria Butina just happens to be at a political event in Las Vegas. Here's what she asks then candidate Donald Trump.
I'm visiting from Russia, so my question...
Good friend of Obama, Putin. He likes Obama a lot. Go ahead.
My question will be about foreign politics.
Okay.
If you would be elected as a president, what will be your foreign politics, especially in the relationships with my country? And do you want to continue the politics of sanctions that are damaging of both economy, or you have any other ideas?
I believe I would get along very nicely with Putin, okay? And I mean, where we have the strength. I don't think you'd need the sanctions. I think that we would get along very, very well. I really believe that.
You know, Sarah, it's interesting. It apparently extends beyond this operation. There seems to have been some higher goals. What are you hearing?
Well, that's right. This is something that went back for years, her trying to infiltrate these various political organizations, and it really does read like something of a spy novel. You know, she's this young Russian woman. She's very attractive. She sets up this gun rights group in Moscow. She even does a spread in Russian GQ with these very sort of risque photos of her posing with guns, and she uses this gun group to make a number of ties in the U.S. When we look at the charging documents, they talk about a U.S. political operative who helped her make other introductions to other politically influential Americans in the U.S. Now, we know from our own reporting that there was a man, Paul Erickson. He's a South Dakota political operative who ended up fostering this years-long relationship with Maria Butina. He even set up a company, which he told McClatchy was to help pay for some of her educational expenses. So this is the kind of thing that went on for years. It spanned a number of political operatives all along. Wolf, she's reporting back to Alexander Torshin, this influential Russian, and he's encouraging her along the way. At one point, according to these court filings, he sends her a Twitter message saying that she needs to have patience, cold blood, and faith in yourself, and everything will turn out.
The Americans she interacted with, they were not named, I take it right now, in this current charge, right?
That's right. So they're not named in the latest documents that we have, the court filings. As we said, she had this long relationship with Paul Erickson, the South Dakota political operative, and there are still sealed documents related to this case. So that means it's possible, for instance, the government could bring charges against Alexander Torshin, this Russian that they say that she worked with, who is also not named in the court filing, and who has already been slapped with sanctions by the U.S. government. And we don't know what's going to happen when it comes to these Americans that they don't name in the court filings, and if they were just kind of unwitting participants who were caught up in the ploy by this sort of young, charming, alleged Russian spy.
Yeah, it's amazing. Just indicted by a federal grand jury here in Washington. I suspect there's more going on that we clearly don't know about. Sarah, thank you very much. Joining us now, Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. He's a member of the Foreign Relations and Judiciary Committees. Senator, does President Trump's attempt today to clean up his remarks from yesterday in Helsinki change your mind?
Well, first, I wish he had been as clear and as forceful about his support for the intelligence community when he was standing next to our adversary, Vladimir Putin, as he tried to be today. If President Trump is now going to say that he believes our intelligence community rather than Vladimir Putin, he needs to start acting like it. Wolf, one of the most striking things to me is that our president knew for days that there were impending indictments of 12 Russian military intelligence officers for interfering in our election, yet he persisted repeatedly last week in continuing to call the Mueller investigation a rigged witch hunt. If he believes our intelligence community, he should believe the counterintelligence investigation that produced those 12 indictments and stop calling the Mueller indictment a witch hunt.
As you know, the president met with Putin for, about 130 minutes, and they met privately, only some interpreters, 2 interpreters present, no key advisors, no Secretary of State, no National Security Advisor, nothing along those lines. Are you concerned about what happened in that private conversation?
I am. As you know, Wolf, I recently joined the Republican chairman of both the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Senator Flake led a group of 5 of us, and we went to meetings with the leaders of Finland and Latvia, Denmark and Sweden, and heard across the region grave concerns that President Trump, in a private meeting with Vladimir Putin, might make big concessions, whether on Ukraine and Crimea, on military exercises with NATO, or on trying to sort of let bygones be bygones in terms of establishing a new and stronger relationship with Putin, our enemy. We don't know what conversations were taken up in that period, and I think we should do everything we can to find out. I'm pressing Republican colleagues to work with us to ensure that we get some accountability around that conversation, that we have hearings imminently with Secretary Pompeo or with Director of National Intelligence Coates, or that we get access to some of those translators' notes from the meeting in Helsinki that President Trump and President Putin held.
You know, it's interesting. Republican Congressman Mark Sanford of South Carolina says he doesn't know if Russia has anything on President Trump. He's calling on the president, though, to release his tax returns. Do you think that would help establish whether President Trump has any relevant business relationships with Putin or with Russia?
It would certainly help clear up something. As you know, President Trump's the first modern candidate for president to refuse to release his taxes. And there have been allegations now for years that he had business interests in Russia. It'd be a great way for President Trump to clear his name on this issue, to disclose his financial holdings. Obviously, he has interest in lots of different business concerns, but to have access to his finances, to get a full financial disclosure comparable to what previous presidents have made available would help address that issue.
It's interesting. Mark Sanford is putting that out there right now. You heard our latest reporting here on CNN about this Russian woman who's now been charged as a Russian agent. When you look at her interactions with Republican officials, what are your concerns?
I think we're going to learn more in the days ahead about a persistent campaign that she led to try and get closer and closer access to the Trump campaign.